Greetings, my friends, and welcome back to the Home Slice. We are at the semifinals of my large folding knife tournament, and coming up in this episode, we are going to see the classic Benchmade Osborne 940 in aluminum handle, which is my don't worry about it because it's thick enough not to break work knife, face off against my slicey work knife, which is the Manly Knives 14C28 in peak model. Crazy slicer, so thin, really satisfying cutting. So we're gonna sort of compare at this really large edge length whether I prefer sort of a rugged, sort of thicker blade for a work knife, or whether the enjoyment of a thin slicer sort of wins out in priority. I'm going to carry the two of those for the first week, have them both in my pocket, and see which one I grab more often. In the second week, I'm going to carry the Denim Micarta GiantMouse Ace Reo model in CPM MagnaCut against the Civivi Imperium model in canvas micarta and Damascus steel. These are two sort of mid-thickness, slim, sort of classier, slimmer work knives, and we'll see whether the edge retention of the MagnaCut sort of talks me into this Ace model, or whether the thin edge and just the beauty of this Civivi Imperium leans me in the direction of that. So in the next week, after these work knives, I will carry these fancier knives, and I'll put them both in my pocket. I'll see which one I actually grab more often, and I will come back and declare the two winners to you, which will face off in the final of the large knife EDC tournament series. I'll see you guys in a couple weeks. All right, guys, back from the 2 weeks of carry of each of these sets, and we'll start with the Benchmade and the Manly Knives Peak. Manly Knives Peak, this 14C28N is phenomenal. I mean, 14C28N tends to be pretty phenomenal if it's just heat treated relatively right. And the thin edge on this thing is insane, and it just keeps cutting and cutting and cutting. I genuinely am surprised. So I really enjoyed carrying this. I think when we get to the sort of Hall of Fame section, this is going to be slotted in as some kind of slicer. But I did find myself more frequently reaching for the Benchmade 940 in the semifinal because the deployment is so easy in and out. And there are a lot of jobs that you do with a pocket knife where you don't necessarily want to sit down for a nice slicing session and just enjoy. There are some of those, you know. If I pull something out to help me make dinner, then I want it to be like nice and thin and slicey and long. And then I'd be pulling this thing out sometimes over the Benchmade 940. But there's a lot of jobs throughout the week that you just want something that kind of rockets out and goes back away very quickly. And for that, it's hard to beat an axis lock or a button lock. And I just love the aesthetic of the Benchmade 940. I like actually the Spyderco-esque aesthetic of this Manly Knives Peak. It really grew on me over the course of the week, and I was like, oh, like the utilitarianness of it, like sort of is its beauty, is the beauty that it has. And I really enjoyed it. But if they're both sitting out on a table, I'd be like looking at that 940 and I'm like, oh, that's such a cool knife. Warren Osborne just made this sort of like tactically gentleman-y. It doesn't even like fit the boxes, does it? It's a bit of like a alien, like sort of sci-fi blade geometry, and I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I think it's so cool. It's got a nice narrow tip that's still thick enough that I'm never worried about breaking it. The slicing geometry is just thin enough that it feels nice going through stuff, at least when one of these is new. When it's been through 30 sharpenings, it's a bit thick, but I really enjoyed the balance of it. There's nothing that it feels really like bad at. Where the Manly Knives Peak is a phenomenal slicer, I would worry a little bit about the tip in certain things if I had to dig. at anything, which doesn't happen very often, but admittedly it does have some limitations there. So both great knives. I think they're probably both keepers, at least for the moment. But I passed the Benchmade 940 on to the next round of the tournament, and we'll cover the semifinal and final in this episode. So that took us on to the Damascus Civivi Imperium. It's a beautiful knife which faced off against the GiantMouse Ace Reo, which is in denim micarta and MagnaCut. And definitely you began to feel the MagnaCut steel keeping an edge a little bit better and sort of showing a bit of that long-lasting working edge. But to be honest, the thinness of the edge on this Civivi actually like saved it. And there were a bunch of tasks where, because the edge is thinner, like a lot thinner, it performed probably a little bit better at times, even than the MagnaCut on this GiantMouse Ace Reo. And I really went back and forth on this one because they're both really beautiful. They're both really slim and long. They both have lots of edge. There's just so much good going on in both of these knives. But in the end, there was sort of one deciding factor because so many things about the knives are excellent. And it's that the edge and the blade stock on this GiantMouse Ace Reo is just barely over the line of where I like it. It was a little bit thick. I'd be cutting through a carrot and the thing would want to like curve or like it would break it into pieces a little bit, or like make little fractures, and you'd be cutting up your apple and it's kind of like you can see that it broke in sections rather than slicing. And I do like, for if something's going to be like a long sort of precision EDC like this, I do like it to be thin enough to do some of those basic tasks with a little bit of finesse. And in the end, the thickness actually caused me to decide, I really like the Civivi Imperium. It keeps beating things that like should beat it. It won like the first tournament, I think, the hollow grind versus flat grind tournament, I think was won by a Nitro V Imperium. And it's just, for me, like one of the most well-balanced designs to have come out in the last several years, and it keeps surprising me. So actually, I chose the Damascus Imperium over the GiantMouse Ace Reo, though this is a brilliant design. I think if this thing was 2.5 millimeters rather than 3.5 or 4, I can't remember exactly the thickness on this, but if it was 2.5 millimeters or 2 millimeters thick, and if behind the edge it was more like 12 thousandths of an inch, this would be nearly unbeatable. It just is a brilliant design by Anso and Voxnace. But unfortunately, that thickness, it sort of deters me a little bit. And I know that's probably a bit picky, but it is what it is. We went on to the final and I resharpened the Damascus Imperium and the Benchmade 940 with fine edges. I think I liked the dual grit edge performance on both of these steels better, to be honest, but the fine edge wasn't bad. I did a diamond fine edge on each of them on Veneve Waterstones down to a 3 to 5 micron OCB Veneve stone. And they both took a nice keen edge. I find that on the, like if I start cutting up cardboard or something like that, the fine edge does tend to lose aggression a little bit faster than the dual grit edges. Although actually I didn't do a dual grit edge on this one originally. I have done a dual grit edge on S30V and it does do pretty well, but I actually did a Spyderco Ultrafine, I'm remembering. And then I went back to diamond to restore aggression. And I really liked that better than just straight diamond. But anyway, these are both like great performers. Really love the handle material on both of them. The silhouette, obviously, like, okay. So obviously, this is my aspect ratio. Okay, this is my favorite aspect ratio. This is a little wider and a little longer than I would like it to be. This is a little bit longer than I'd like it to be. This is my aspect ratio right here, okay? That That size, okay? So knife makers, if you want to win my tournament, make me something around that size if you can. I really like them both, and I think that they both probably have a place in my Hall of Fame, which I'll get to in a moment. But I think that overall, it just in terms of sheer enjoyment over the process, is close because I've never had a Damascus knife before, and it's really fun to like show people and talk about it. And again, they do approach it more like they view your hobby as more of like an art form if you have a Damascus knife and less of like a scary thing if they're non-knife people. But I do think in terms of bringing me joy, there's something about the Warren Osborne Benchmade 940 with like the green aluminum with the closed back. It just brings me joy. I just like it. And part of it is aluminum. Aluminum's definitely my favorite handle material. But part of it is just the way that this design is sculpted. It's just sculpted so nicely. And the Imperium also is so clean and so crisp and beautiful. And I do like it in its own right. The ergonomics are great for a small folder. The thumb ramp is excellent, just really gentle. The jimping is gentle. I don't really prefer having a forward choil, but it is nice if you're cutting up cardboard or something like that. I do rest my finger there, so I have something to butt the cardboard up against so it doesn't slip off the edge into the sharpening choil area. But yeah, they're both really good. But the Benchmade 940, it just brings me a little bit more joy. I can't nail it down to one particular aspect. I think the working edge is a little better on the S30V. And I think that the aluminum and satin sort of asks to be like worked with. And so I do a lot of work with it and just tear stuff up. But where the Damascus feels a little finer and the micarta, like I don't really want to just grab it if my hand is covered in oil from cooking because then I'll have to like clean it off. And so I do end up using the Benchmade 940 for a wider variety of things and doing some dirty work with it. And that's probably part of it. But I think another part of it is I just like the storyline and the history of this knife. And I personally have had several variants and carried them through a lot of stories in my own life. So it's a bit fond and endearing for me, really. And it just hits that weight and narrowness sort of profile that I'm looking for with good enough edge geometry, very tough blade design. Yeah, so both of these were phenomenal. Benchmade 940 is the winner of this tournament. I'll transition to the Hall of Fame and talk about changes there and which knives from this tournament are going to take a more permanent place in my long-term storage and use. All right, changes to the old Hall of Fame. The streamlined worker slot in my lineup used to be inhabited by the CJRB Pirate, and it is going to be replaced with the Benchmade 940. This is like a slot for a work knife that has an excellent design, a decently strong lock, and high fidget factor. I think the 940 fits the bill. Next, I have a slot essentially for one formal knife, and sitting in it has been this carbon fiber shred Civivi Imperium. But to be honest, I think I like the Damascus blade of the same knife even better as a sort of formal event knife. I really have enjoyed this. However, the form factor is pretty perfect on these, and so I'm not sure that I want to get rid of either of these Imperiums. So we're going to make this my new class act, which is like a long narrow blade, clean aesthetic, and fancier look to it for like a formal event, steak knife essentially. And we're going to switch this to my flawless fine edge slicer. That edge on these things is actually surprisingly thin, and this Nitro V takes an incredible edge. And so I think I like this thing better than the petrified fish that has been in that slot. That being this guy here, PF719 in 12C27. Yeah, love this knife, and amazing detent, very thin behind the edge, just really good geometry, good feel. I don't know if I'll get rid of it or keep it around, but I think in the Hall of Fame, I do prefer a little bit to have a pocket clip, and I really do enjoy the overall design of the Civivi Imperium. So I think we're gonna put that one into flawless fine edge slicer. We'll retire this guy from that slot. And we will retire the CJRB Pyrite with this guy. And we will make this the new formal knife, replacing that one in that slot. The last change to the standings is I've had this Real Steel G-slip. It's a wonderful slip joint. It's got miles of edge. It is a two-handed folder here. But beautiful, clean aesthetic, great O-stop hell design. Really have enjoyed this as my picnic packer, which is to say the knife that I would take for food prep on the go. And I do love this knife for that. I do enjoy the long, narrow shaping on it. However, the slicing action and the enduring keen edge on this Manly Knives Peak was so ridiculous. Sorry, all of my knives are used and a bit gross, aren't they? It was so good, and it's so thin behind the edge. I think it's at like 14 or 15 degrees per side right now. And it's also got miles of edge, also really narrow. It's not quite as much of a looker as this one, to be honest, but I think it's gonna edge out this Real Steel G-slip. And the main reason why is this sucker right here. I'm moving away from slip joints. They're not bad. I understand why people like them, but I am really enjoying just having locks on all my knives. I cut myself with a slip joint late last year, and yeah, I'm just moving toward that model. So these are the newly switched knives into the standings, and we'll rotate a few of these out. I probably will sell off some of these and raise some money for the next knife project.